how the diesel technician shortage is affecting the trucking industry, and what fleets can do to help solve the problem.
Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm Jason Cannon and my co-host is Matt Cole. There's been a lot of ink spilled and conversations had about whether or not there's a truck driver shortage, but we don't hear near as much about another population of transportation workers that also impact trucking. That's diesel technicians. According to new American Transportation Research Institute reports, nearly 2/3 of diesel shops report that their locations are understaffed this year.
ATRI's research found that 65.5% of surveyed diesel shops reported being understaffed this year due to difficulty in recruiting and retaining techs. The new report dives into the causes of the shortage and what can be done to help attract and retain talent.
This is an issue that, folks in shops will tell you about. It's a shortage of qualified diesel technicians, right? The job to work as a diesel tech, it's a skilled job. It involves a lot of particular knowledge. And so it's tricky to make sure that you have the personnel that you need to run a shop successfully and efficiently. Trucking employs almost 60,000 techs, but what we found is that almost 2/3 of all shops are understaffed right now, actually. And part of that is turnover, 16.5% annual turnover. That's not horrible. It's we'd like it to be lower, but it's not to say that people are just leaving the industry in droves because of existing issues interiorly, but we're struggling to actually get people in to begin with. The vacancy rate is almost 20%. So it's really, again, that challenge of making sure techs are equipped to be able to enter the industry and then to actually thrive there.
One issue that's a challenge for trucking is that diesel techs are needed in other industries like agriculture and construction. That increases competition for qualified techs.
For one thing, trucking is growing, right? So in the last 10 years, 30% increase in the number of drivers employed, but just a 23% increase in the number of techs employed. So again, that sort of speaks to the shortage side of it. The other industries that we're looking at, a lot of them are also trying to grow, right? Construction, automotive, bus and passenger transit, even agriculture. Those are really the key industries that we see as competing for tech talent. And even though each of those industries has different equipment, different protocols, different requirements, the skill set of a diesel tech is quite transferable across them. So there may be some additional training involved, but once a tech has those skills, they're able to sort of move across those industries, some of which offer different benefits, different pros and cons, different perks compared to the other. They really are, 4 or 5 unique employment opportunities, all competing for techs.
Formal training, or lack thereof, is also an issue for diesel shops. ATRI found many diesel techs enter the trade without completing a tech training program, which often results in unqualified techs who need on-the-job training.
For one thing, again, about 2/3 of all techs don't have any formal training prior to entering. Part of that is, maybe there isn't the finances, maybe there isn't the time to be able to go into a trade school. Maybe the trade schools don't even have the openings, right? Depending on where a tech lives. Some parts of the country have great trade programs that are pumping out a large number of diesel techs, and other areas are more of a training desert, if you will. So that's certainly a challenge for individuals who want to become techs, especially because one thing that we hear from training programs is a lot of students who want to be techs. They come in without prior knowledge that, maybe 50 years ago, you were working under the hood of a car with your dad or something. A lot of that kind of general knowledge isn't around as much anymore. And so training programs find that more often they have to start from zero, basically. And that can even include issues like reading and basic math comprehension. So it's partly a training at the high school level, and then partly a techs trying to enter the career, but not always having the opportunity to do that secondary training.
Just like with truck drivers, there are some barriers to entry for diesel techs, as well as issues that can keep people from entering the industry.
One of the big ones is the cost of tools. This is one you hear from techs all the time. Tools are expensive. You can easily spend $5,000 to $10,000 on a set of tools. Another big barrier is just mentioned the training aspect. That's a challenge for techs too, because they know that they aren't qualified if they're coming in with no training, right? They feel that stress and it weighs on them. And that's, one of the reasons why we lose techs right away. They maybe take the job a couple weeks, are overwhelmed. And another one that's related to that is a lack of mentorship or support structures in shops that can help pair new techs with more experienced ones to help develop not only the tech's skills, but also the kind of workplace community that we found when shops do have good relationships among their techs. Those techs are much more likely to stay at that employer.
For the diesel shops, untrained or unqualified techs need a lot of time and require a lot of money to get them up to speed, which is a major challenge in recruiting new techs.
Certainly, shops are doing a lot of training right now, actually. And that's part of the challenge, right? So an untrained tech, someone without formal education, coming into the shop needs about 360 hours, $8,200 in employee trainee wages alone to sort of get them up to speed. So certainly the shops are doing this, but the expense is really high. And the same thing goes for tools, right? A lot of folks will say, well, why don't the shops just pay for all the tools? Well, if you pay, $5,000 towards a tech's tools, over $8,000 training them, and then they decide, well, trucking's okay, but actually I kind of want more of what construction has to offer, and then they leave, that's a pretty big bill that a company is footing. So finding ways to improve training programs where they exist and finding ways to get more techs into training programs is something that is really a top priority for addressing this.
For fleets that do employ diesel techs, ATRI does outline some best practices for recruiting and retaining them.
I think one of the biggest findings of this report really is understanding how trucking compares to some of these other industries and what makes trucking appealing. We did this great part of the research was we asked techs in trucking what they think about other industries in several key categories. And then we compared their assessment. And, for example, in an area like variety of work, trucking is probably never going to beat out agriculture and construction when it comes to the variety of different work that a tech sees. And variety of work, by the way, is one of the top priorities for techs in trucking or any other industry. But what trucking can do is it can offer things like clean and comfortable shops and better shifts than, for example, ag or construction. And if it can play up those strengths while still offering and giving a compelling reason why, hey, you're going to get a good variety of work here. You're not just going to be stuck doing the standard, oil change and basic maintenance for the next 30 years. Trucking companies who can do that play to the strengths of trucking compared to these other industries while still being able to say, hey, we can offer you something in these other areas where you might think agriculture is the place to go. That's going to be the way that shops can position themselves to really bring in more techs and then, hopefully hold on to them down the road.
ATRI also gauged the satisfaction of diesel techs already in the trucking industry and identified the areas that cause any dissatisfaction.
On the whole, techs in trucking are generally pretty satisfied, honestly. We broke this down by specific aspects of employment, and there are some areas where they feel that trucking isn't living up to expectations. One of those big ones is pay. A lot of techs come into trucking thinking that pay is going to be one of the biggest factors, and then we tend to see that on a scale of 1 to 5, that average rating actually comes in at about 2.4, so a little bit below the okay level. Another area where techs are not as satisfied is pay incentives for additional certification and training. That's a big part, obviously, of advancing not only in your skills and your opportunities, but in your pay. And so techs not fully satisfied in that area too. Both of those things, pay and incentives for additional certs or training, are two of the 6 areas that we identified are statistically significant when it comes to techs choosing to look for another job versus choosing to stay at their current job. So if a tech is satisfied with their pay or if a tech is satisfied with their incentives for additional training, those techs are more likely to stick around. A couple other of those big factors are variety of work. Again, I mentioned how interesting their work is. And then I also mentioned earlier interactions with colleagues. So in those key areas, if techs are feeling like the job just isn't living up to things, those are techs who are going to be looking for other jobs. There's lots of other aspects of employment that may be important, right? Up-to-date equipment, how close is it? How safe is the shop? A lot of these other aspects. But when it comes to where the rubber really hits the road, the make or break aspects, those are the ones that you really want to think about to keep that retention.
That's it for this week's 1044. You can read more on ccjdigital.com. While you're there, sign up for our newsletter and stay up to date on the latest in trucking industry news and trends. If you have any questions or feedback, please let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications so you can catch us again next week.